Live from the Newsmax studio in New York City, here is Steve Malzberg.
عقيدتنا في قتالكم أننا سنبيدكم على بكرة أبيكم ولن نبقي منكم أحدا لأنكم ظلام الأرض وشذاذ الآفاق ومرتزقة الزمان بل مرتزقة كل زمان. راجعوا التاريخ أيها الإخوة، فما وجد اليهود في مكان إلا سعوا فيه فسادا. ألم تقف على قول الله يا مسلم؟ ويسعون في الأرض، والألف واللام في كلمة الأرض تفيد الشمول والعموم، ويسعون في الأرض فسادا والله لا يحب المفسدين.
All right, folks, welcome aboard. That's just your friendly sermon taking place from Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Joining us now to talk about that and what it means and the significance of it is Dr. Andrew Bostom, professor of medicine at Brown University and, of course, great author. Hello, doctor.
Hi, Steve.
All right, so tell us who this was, what exactly this was. We saw the tape from memory there. They translated it for us. Tell us what we were watching and the significance of it.
Well, you were seeing a Palestinian Hamas cleric inciting for a mass killing of the Jews, invoking a very specific Quranic motif, a Quranic theme, repeated at verse 533, so the 5th surah, the 33rd verse, and then the 64th verse of that same surah or chapter, which claims that the Jews are global corruptors, basically, and that they have permanently engendered the anger of Allah and the Muslims. And again, so here he's using it as yet another one of the ad nauseum calls for a genocide of the Jews. Now, curiously, Steve, this was on the 25th. Within 4 days, the IDF bombed the studio that was broadcasting this kind of incitement to mass killing.
And this, of course, is not just, oh my gosh, how could this have happened? This is something that is commonplace, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also through the so-called peace-loving, moderate Palestinian Authority-run TV, schools, mosques, you name it, correct?
Absolutely, Steve. You could take this back. You know, there's two factions, but they all often come together. The so-called sort of pseudo-secular faction, which derives from the Grand Mufti, Haj Amin al-Husani, but which is also inherently jihadist. And then, of course, the Hamas faction, which comes from Izzeddin al-Qassam. The rockets are named after him. And that's purely theocratic jihadist. But they work hand in glove. They have through all the period of almost 100 years now of conflagration. You know, al-Husseini is infamous during the war, for example, during World War II, for broadcasting, you know, kill the Jews wherever you find them, when he was formally allied with Hitler. But these pronouncements are embedded into the ideology of both Hamas and Fatah. The Hamas covenant is absolutely riddled with these kinds of calls. It's pure jihadism. It's pure Islamic anti-Semitism. The very opening of the Hamas covenant, which came out in August of 1988, is a Quranic verse, Quran 3:112, which talks about the Jews being permanently pitched with abasement for having killed the prophets, transgressed against Allah's will, and this is their inveterate characteristic. And the covenant goes on to call for a jihad annihilation of Israel. It invokes themes from Sunni Islamic end of times theology, the now infamous, you know, hadith, the tradition of Muhammad with the Garkad tree and the Muslims, all the trees are calling out except for the Garkad tree. There's a Jew behind me, come kill him. And this is supposed to usher in the Messianic age. So these themes are repeated not only by Hamas, but also by Fatah. The current Grand Mufti of Fatah was captured on tape repeating that same hadith of Jew annihilation about 1.5 years ago. It's also been repeated, this kind of incitement to mass violence has been repeated by the pinnacle of Sunni Islam over in Egypt at Al-Azhar University. The last two Grand Imams of Al-Azhar University were open in their annihilationist anti-Semitism. Both of them, both Tantawi, who died in 2010, and the current one, Al-Tayeb, the current Grand Imam, openly supported homicide bombing against non-combatants in Israel. And Tantawi, his magnum opus is a 700-page treatise that is pure Jew hatred from the Quran and from the traditions.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Doctor. If the American public, if the world had any desire to know this, if we had a media that had any desire to tell the story above and beyond a body count and sensational-looking video, boy, what an education they would get. I was going to ask you, before you even brought up the Palestinians' history in supporting the Nazis, I don't see any difference. I don't see any real difference between Hamas and the Nazis, and certainly if they had the capability, what they would do to the Jews.
Well, exactly, Steve. I think one is a secular-based, racist, annihilationist anti-Semitism, and the other is a religious, specifically Islamic-based annihilationist anti-Semitism. The Nazis were, frankly, great admirers of these anti-Semitic themes from Islam, and did whatever they could to promote them. And in fact, after the war, many key Nazis that escaped and survived not only went on to the Middle East, but converted to Islam and seemed very content with adopting Islam, and in particular its anti-Semitic themes that are redolent within Islam. I just wanted to say that today actually is a very interesting day. It's 25 and a half years to the day when, on January 31st, 1989, so less than 6 months after the Hamas Covenant came out, my mentor, the historian David Littman, who passed away a couple of years ago, actually presented the Hamas Covenant in English translation to the UN Human Rights Commission and implored them to please condemn it, because, as he put it, again, 25 and a half years ago, he called it a, quote, blatant blueprint for genocide. David, to his credit, over the next 2 decades, would repeatedly bring the covenant up and ask, beg almost, in public for the UN to condemn it, for Muslim clerics to condemn the Hamas Covenant, and of course, it was to no avail.
Yeah, I'm sure it was to no avail. What is you're seeing, and we're all seeing going on here, is Israel making a mistake constantly going on and answering these questions from these left-wing media outlets that obviously have determined that they're going to be on the side of the Palestinians? I mean, even today, Joe Scarborough went off the deep end, in my view, and said, "Enough, Israel, enough." I mean, shouldn't they just do what they got to do and stop answering every single charge, every single bomb that goes off, every single body count, every single video released by Hamas? It just seems like they're beating their head against a wall and they're getting nowhere.
Well, I think that, there's a terrible propaganda war against Israel. We were talking off camera about even something as fundamental as the casualty statistics.
Yeah, talk about the you're saying the IDF is trying to get out there the what they consider to be the accurate casualty figures from the Palestinian side.
Absolutely. Every time one of these Gaza conflagrations comes up, after the fact, the IDF does a very intensive analysis of what the actual casualties were. They've published their methodologies. I could send you the information about it. And what they find is that invariably the Palestinians, of course, the Hamas, whether it's Hamas, Fatah, and their collaborators in these so-called NGOs, grossly distort the percentage of civilian casualties. And in fact, when the final numbers are observed, they're actually no different than, sadly, what has been the phenomenon of human warfare in the modern era, which is that roughly half the casualties are going to be civilians under any circumstances. And in fact, what's remarkable is that if that number holds up in a place like Gaza, which is so densely populated, where it's been admitted even by Israel bashers that Hamas, routinely is using civilian populations as human shields, consistent with its martyrdom ideology, quite frankly, that would make the fact that this conflict will probably reveal that to be true again, i.e. that half the casualties will be civilian, will actually be a testament to the care with which the IDF
Absolutely. If you look at the, I mean, if you look, first of all, if you look at the circumstances, how crowded it is, and what Hamas is doing and where they're firing from, et cetera, and you look at the number of bombings and the number of strikes and the tank shells and all, and then you look at the number of casualties, it is amazingly low. I mean, if Israel was not, here's my point. Don't get me wrong, the death of any civilian is a tragedy. But if Israel were not pinpoint, if Israel were not trying their best to do what they say they're doing, and we're not honest about it, you'd have tens of thousands of dead Palestinians right now.
Absolutely. And in fact...
Anyway, Doctor, we have to end it on that note. I appreciate it. Dr. Andrew Bostom, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, sir. And we'll be here to discuss, we'll bring you Give Me Five next. How do you like that one? On the Steve Malzberg Show.